International Media TV. Television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
So, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. All right. How has the festival been so far? Yay! Good. Well, we are so grateful to all the many people involved, too many to name, but our handler, Rachel, we're particularly grateful for getting us here, wrangling us. Please do turn off your cell phones, though feel free to be tweeting and Instagramming about how fabulous we are. Just have it be in silent. And then after the event, we are going to be across the street signing books. I am Faith Adiele. To my left, Laurette Savoy and Elmaz Abinader, and according to the program, we are three provocative writers of color. If, like me and the rest of the world, you are mourning the demise of Muhammad Ali, you'll see that Jim Brown said Ali didn't go from being the most hated athlete in America to the most beloved until he lost the power of speech. So I'll take being provocative, yeah. So today we're going to be exploring how our country's troubled history and still unfolding ideas of race have marked us and the land and what it means to inhabit terrains of memory. The title of the panel comes from Laurette's new book, Trace, Memory, History, Race, and the American Landscape, which is a finalist for the PEN Open Book Award and shortlisted for the William Sorian International Prize for Writing.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Super exciting news. She's also published Living with the Changing California Coast and edited 2 literary anthologies, one on geology and one, Colors of Nature, Culture, Identity, and the Natural World that we're all in, and which brought the three of us together for the first time. Elmaz is the co-founder of Vona Voices, a workshop for writers of color, and the author of a memoir, 4 plays, and 2 poetry collections. In the Country of My Dreams, which won the PEN Oakland Award, and the recent This House, My Bones, which was the editor's selection for poetry at Willow Books. When the book festival invited me to moderate this panel, I warned them that I am famously known for disliking nature. But as Elmaz has pointed out, land figures prominently in both my memoirs, one which won the PEN Open Book Award, and in My Journey Home, my PBS film about finding my family. The impact of memory, history, and race on the American landscape is a huge topic, one that could be traced from colonial encounters with First Nations people, through the employment of enslaved Africans on the land, through generations of immigration and migration to urban areas, through internments and forced relocation, to today, where communities across the nation are experiencing gentrification and erasure, as always. To give you a sense of how each of us approaches this issue, we're each going to read briefly from our work and then start to have a conversation. Finally, we'll open it up to you to have a larger conversation. So I'd like to invite Elmaz to come up and start us out.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Faith, for that excellent introduction. I don't know how you chose your panels, because there are so many good competing panels, and I'm in this quandary myself, but I'm really, really excited that you're here. I want to give a little up for the Mills people who are here. Yay. Because they're all over. I love it. I'm going to read you a poem which may not seem obvious to you that it fits into something about the American landscape, but when you think about occupation as something the people of this country, especially the indigenous people, have gone through, these principles apply. And this is so much about how I perceive geographies and how they are delivered to us. The poem starts in Pennsylvania, it ends in Palestine. It's called Climb Up and Over. Our garden bordered an alley which crossed into a hayfield and stretched to a hillside. Our yard had lilacs that surrounded a pond filled with sweet peas and crested by vines. Our porch led to a street that lined the road, running from our house all the way to West Virginia. And we walked from our house to Neff Woods, from another to the waterfall across the bridge. The coal mining corner of Pennsylvania, with all its faults, let cows chew from this neighbor to the next and children crossed yards that were not theirs to get to school, and they sat on steps of someone's porch without asking. And we didn't know that this was belonging. This was Pennsylvania, and not Abu Dis, where a wall was erected right down Main Street, keeping kids away from the school they've been going to their whole lives. So what did they do? They wonder like the farmers of Azun, whose vegetable fields, olive trees, are out of reach, who stare at the 25 feet of stone and wire, guarding them from their own food as a security measure that forces a 4-kilometer walk to get in a gate that gives them 20 minutes to slip over to the other side for bushels of barley, if they're still there. Or if you live in the Anata district in East Jerusalem, they're probably not. Some things had to move to make room for the wall, and without your home, everyone is more secure. The landscape is sliced, and lands are carved and contained. I have studied maps. The blue waters and green mountains, yellow countries and red ones all meant something to the cartographers, and I followed them. A puzzle of colors explained in the legend in the corner that said this was the earth. Lakes, mountains, cliffs, buttes, highways, hiking trails, one-way streets, capitals, borders, mileage counters, oceans, rivers snaking through states and countries, ranges peaking across the Urals, frozen tundra, pampas, veldt, thickly populated cities, railroad tracks. I run my finger along each symbol, each road designation, each color, each touchstone. How do you mark a barrier? Make it part of the landscape. What is the symbol of restraint? What is the color of confinement, disruption, loss, and separation? Of sorrow. How do you hold that pen? Diagram that atlas? Sketch that captivity? Do not draw the great wall of the march to liberation. Just mark this slow death to the earth that inhabits it and the people who make it home. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Almaz. It's beautiful. I'm going to be reading 2 short selections that explain perhaps why I'm famously known for not liking nature. I mean, it's okay that it exists outside. So this is the opening paragraph in my essay in Colors of Nature called Notes on the New World. Trying to leave horse heaven. For years, nature and I didn't speak. I grew up ignoring the world outside our house, determined to resist this small town America place that was not Africa, not Europe, not like us. A dry indentation of earth cupped in a ring of sagebrush hills so matte and purple they could have been a painted backdrop for one of the countless westerns my mother grew up on, red felt cowboy hat dangling from a string around her neck. Hills holding us back like the big blue bowl of sky wherever we looked. The Rattlesnake Hills to the north, the Horse Heaven Hills to the south. The sour smell of the feedlot at the entrance to town enveloping the car and worming its way through vents and window cracks. Endless days of punishing sun with not enough trees, broken sidewalks reflecting the light with blinding intensity. Escape that. And I did. And this is the beginning of an essay called The Way Back, and it begins with 2 epigraphs. The land is the home of every being, man, and spirit. While alive, one lives on it. When he dies, he is buried inside it. Any person who has no land is worse than a slave. Igbo worlds. Igbo slaves were described as, quote, difficult to manage and disposed to committing suicide, unquote. The belief was very strong that at death one returned to the land of one's birth. Thus flying via suicide was a sure way, perhaps the only way, to get back, at which one point could be reincarnated and live in the land of family and relations far from the experience called America. From a quality of anguish, the Igbo response to enslavement in North America. As soon as we cross the border into our state, the instant the Peugeot reaches the outskirts of our ancestral village, my stranger father's body shifts. I see it even from the back seat, the way his thin shoulders settle, his sagging chin lifts. I imagine his chest, a weathered mahogany trunk powered by the pacemaker, creaking, expanding with the weather of home. He is back to Ala Ibo, the goddess of earth, Ibo land. I'm still shaking, physically from the Peugeot's ancient shocks atop the bumpy dirt roads, emotionally from the drive through Aba, the so-called great market of West African literature and star of my father's letters some 25 years ago. Aba is a commercial town, population 58,000, level land, paved roads, modern air-conditioned houses, modern hospital, a big river, many schools, some 40 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. But I tell you, there are slums too, fish markets with awful smells, factories with smoky chimneys. I can't believe that the tout-loud, traitor-chaotic, oil-black and dusty, unpaved sprawl of smoldering trash used to be something to write about. A market town established by our particular clan of the Ibo, the Ungwa, then seized and turned into an administrative military post by the British in 1901, a center of palm oil and palm kernel production, of cola nut processing, a polluted town on the Aba River surrounded by oil wells. It's hard to imagine that as the city closest to our ancestral village, the largest concentrated population of Ungwa, Ibo, Aba is an affiliation I'm supposed to claim. Thank you.
I have to say I'm very grateful to be here, and I want to give thanks to Elmaz and to Faith for joining me in conversation, and thanks to you all for being here. And also deeply grateful to the Bay Area Book Festival and to Counterpoint Press, who published my book recently. I was born in Berkeley, California, and moved away as a child, and I've come home. And I feel as if I've come home now in many different ways, and my voice has come home too. So thank you for being here. I'm going to read from the opening of the book, the prologue, just to give you a sense of where I'm beginning and perhaps a sense of where I tried to go. And I know our conversation will touch on many of these issues. And for those who do not live in New England or do not know frozen worlds, what I'm about to read, it's not as stupid as it seems. Prologue. Thoughts on a frozen pond. In the dead of winter, I like to walk on water, held above liquid depths of the nearby lake by a vast frozen plain. This ice demands respect. I look again, listen again, attentive to any crack or yielding to my weight. When the surface is more solid than a hardwood dance floor and much thicker, I venture far. Even then, I hear the gloop, a muffled gloosh, a very quiet, distant plurp, water undulating beneath ice and me. Sunlight appears to emanate from above and below on cloudless February days, raying through the crystalline lattice underfoot. With my eyes but inches from the surface, any sense of depth, of refracted distance, yields to a sense of motion arrested. Air bubbles halt in mid-ascent. White oak leaves descend as if on invisible steps, suspended for a season above the lake bottom. The recent past lies beneath me in these leaves, plucked and blown here by January's heavy winds. Inches away, they are out of reach because I kneel within the next stratum. Thoughts of time's passage always come to mind on such walks. Thoughts of how memory of any form becomes inscribed in the land. The hills surrounding this lake and my home are worn remains of long vanished mountains. Glacial debris from the last ice age produces a rock crop in my garden each and every spring. and stone walls that 2 centuries ago once bordered fields and pastures, they now thread the dark heart of forests. Lauren Isley wrote in The Immense Journey that human beings are denied the dimension of time, so rooted are we in our particular now. We cannot in person step backward or forward from our circumscribed pinpoints. I cannot touch a leaf encased in ice, nor can I feel the calloused hands that once stacked these walls. Yet, we make our lives among the relics and ruins of former times and former worlds. And each of us is, too, a landscape inscribed by memory and by loss. I've long felt estranged from time and place, uncertain of where home lies. My skin, my eyes, my hair recall the blood of 3 continents as paths of ancestors, free and enslaved Africans, colonists from Europe, and peoples indigenous to this land converge in me. But I've known little of them or their paths to my present, though I've tracked long bygone moments on this continent from rocks and fossils, those remnants of deep time. The traces of a more intimate lineal past have seen hidden or lost. Yet to live in this country is to be marked by its still unfolding history, life marks seen and unseen. From my circumscribed pinpoint, I must try to trace what has marked me. The way traverses many forms of memory and silence of a people as well as a single person. And because our lives take place among the shadows of unnumbered years, the journey crosses America and time. Come with me. We may find that home lies in remembering, in piecing together the fragments left, and in reconciling what it means to inhabit terrains of memory and to be one. Trace, noun, a way or path, a course of action, footprint or track, vestige of a former presence, an impression, minute amount, a life mark. Trace, verb, to make one's way, to pace or step, to travel through, to discern, to mark or draw, to follow tracks or footprints, to pursue, to discover. And the path led from the San Andreas Fault Zone to a South Carolina plantation, from an island in Lake Superior to Indian Territory in Oklahoma and the black towns established there before and after the Civil War. From national parks to burial grounds to the names that the American landscape wears, and from the U.S.-Mexico border to the nation's capital. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is lovely. Well, this is pretty exciting to see a lot of intersections here. I'm seeing occupation, identity, movement, border crossing, names, maps, all sorts of things. So let's open it up and talk about how do we approach the American landscape and what came up for each of us upon hearing each other's work.
Well, one of the things that I connected when I heard both your works is that there's a cellular ancestral landscape that is inside of our own bodies, and that a lot of our lives we're searching to find that again. And when you started, Lorette, by saying I'm home, I'm wondering what part of Berkeley is Lorette's home after she had done, because I've read the book several times, all this traversing all this tracing. What is it about Berkeley? And I often feel that there's a geographic imperative. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to a landscape that you weren't raised in and you go, this is home. This is my geography. And very often, people don't get that choice. They get uprooted, they get resettled, they get occupied, they get pushed away. So what happens to the disconnect between the cellular desire and the place that you have to live in? And then what happens to that longing for that ancestral space that you never get to it?
I think a lot of what you said, what both of you read, touched me deeply, and I heard some similar things. And I think just what you mentioned about longing, what I'm interested also is in what is the disconnect between longing and belonging, and how do you bridge that? And is it possible to bridge that? And my sense of finding home and what I attempted to do in Trace, and I have to admit, it was a journey of discovery that I'm still trying to find the answers to. I don't know if I'll ever find a specific home, and I'm not sure if that is really what I need. But for me, home is coming to recognize or to situate oneself in time and in space. That is across generations. And if I could find more about who my ancestors were, where they were, and how they defined themselves in relationship to the place where they lived. And I know in this case, some of what I heard in both of what you're reading are a sense of containment, sense of boundaries, sense of division. And so dispossession and displacement are much a part of the legacy of finding that longing and making the connection to belonging or trying to cross those borders.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I related so much to what you're saying because I'm also mixed from 3 continents. And the thing for me was, of course, feeling born into exile. And so feeling, having this landscape and not relating to it. So then deciding, I'm an indoor kid, like an indoor cat. Like, I don't want to go outside. Right. And so for me, that journey is then, finding my family involved going, it was all village life. So, I find a village in Finland, I find a village in Nigeria, and I'm like, oh my God, we're from small towns, and I love them, but they're tortured too, and it's interesting how that occupation goes on everywhere too. So it's like, so you find the homeland, but there's a way in which you connect, but there's a way in which there are all these things we haven't seen that have gone on beforehand, which I think we feel when we're there too, that kind of unease. And I feel that our landscape in the U.S. has been unresolved. We haven't talked about what happened on these landscapes, and that makes them problematic.
Well, to talk about them means to face some unsettling histories. I suspect that many people here have seen Al Gore's In Inconvenient Truth, but this is a case of many inconvenient truths about the American past that public history tends not to want to address, because many things then would have to be faced in order to reach that.
Right. Well, it also comes to the point where you think that what controls where people live. It's so political, it's financial, it's based on violence and aggression. And then I look at the attempts for people to, okay, I'm here, I'm stuck here, I'm going to do whatever I can to be here. Reminds me, and I brought this up in our discussions, I don't know if you guys remember Lorna de Cervantes' poem about Freeway 580 and how the Mexican women after the freeway is laid out go back under the freeway to find the herbs that were growing there before the freeway was put in. And so you find a way to settle. You find that place in Eastern Washington, or you find that place wherever your family is, but it never stays still for you.
Right.
But back in the village, that stays still.
Right. Yeah. There's that. But yeah, like if I go to my hometown and I write the heroic immigrant narrative of my grandparents coming from nothing and like putting together this farm, and I'm like, oh wait, but we stole that all from Native peoples to start with. So not really a triumphant heroic homecoming. So, yeah.
But to recognize that and acknowledge it and to integrate it into and I think for all of us, our paths, not just in our individual lives, with the lives of family, are not linear, they're not simple, they're not fluid, but are they're very much sinuous, and perhaps there are those. You have to forgive me. My background is in geoscience, and I often turn to geologic metaphors like erosion and uplift and all of that, tectonic forces. But it's true. They apply to our lives too. And I think part of what's important is understanding that so much of what we may not know about our connections, our relationships to place over time, may be related to forces, as Elmaz noted and as Faith noted, that have been external. And then how do we come to terms with them and speak of them?
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. I was really struck by the line in your poem where you say we crossed into yards that were not theirs, I think, and just with everything going on in the world nowadays, and stand your ground, and the idea that you could be that's another world where you could just not pay attention to the borders of home and, be raised by the village, and that was the point that was most poignant for me. I think we've really kind of internalized those boundaries so much now that, a man is a country that he can defend.
Right, and they'll sick the dogs on you or pull out the rifles.
Right.
But there was a time in small town America where, you remember when the kids got on their bikes and said, get home till dark, and you don't know where they went, what part of the landscape they explored, and we had a lot of exploration to do, but it's changed and it's sad, And I hated being there, by the way. It's just that was
you
romantic.
Hated what?
Small town.
Right.
But, yeah, but it's very romantic in the poem, isn't it?
Right.
I got stories.
Anything that didn't kill you at the time becomes grist for nostalgia later.
That's true.
Such is the work of the writer.
That's true.
So, so when we do talk about, there's this question that often we get, like, where are you from? No, where are you really from? And it's like, well, where do you start to answer that question, right? But I am interested in then, when we start to trace our own people's journeys to answer that question, what does it mean to be of African descent in this experience called America? What does it mean to be an immigrant? What does it mean to be a native person? How does that get played out differently in this landscape?
Not a simple question. And I think for every person, regardless of their heritage, they would probably give a different response. I think for me, as someone of mixed heritage who from appearance people would say, oh, you're just African American, and then would make the assumption that your people were enslaved right before the Civil War, and that you're from this place, and that you do this and that. You have to fit within this frame. I would point out that those frames are very faulty. Beyond faulty. So I think I'm going to be in a convoluted way, getting back to answer your question, and I may not be answering it fully. The past that I have come from, I know, is broken and pitted by gaps, major gaps, and some of these gaps involve the loss of language and voice. I speak in English, I write in English, but people from Africa, I have no idea what the languages were, and therefore the ways in which they communicated, not just bodily, but culturally. Native peoples, I don't have access to that language as well. So loss of language and voice, loss of direct connection to homeland. Where in Africa? At this point, all I know is along the West Coast. But where exactly? I don't know. Here in Native America, I do know that. It's in the area around the Chesapeake, the colonial Tidewater, Maryland and Virginia. But from the 1600s, 1700s on, just as you noted, they lost that land. They were forcibly displaced from it. So then at what point does that become home? So can I claim that of the English ancestors who came, who were the colonists, who enslaved some of my people, who had some of my people as indentured servants, and also displaced some of my people from that land, yet they claimed that land, and Maryland and Virginia grew from it. Do I say that Maryland and Virginia are home? It's not that simple. It's not that simple at all. The land is, but the land itself has come under bondage and under redefinitions and different forms of possession. Possession in the literal sense of grabbing and claiming the land, but also the possession of the mind, the ideas of what that land is, the names that that land would wear. Maryland and Virginia were not what the native peoples call them. So,
Maryland, no?
yeah. So that's just part of an answer, and there's more. But I don't want to hog this.
Well, from the immigrant, I can only represent one immigrant situation, and that's the one I know. But I remember early on in ethnic theory, there was this belief that people recreated the villages in terrains that were similar to the village they came from, which doesn't explain why the first mosque in the U.S. was in South Dakota. Think about that.
Is that true?
It is totally true.
Whoa.
So, however, people from a village would go to the same place, and they would keep the language, and they would keep the religion, and then what they created, and then we have another kind of a containment, is an impossibility to almost integrate. So there's this other kind of, and they froze in time.
Right.
In other words, the people back in Lebanon are going into the 70s, while the Lebanese in the U.S. are in the 50s or the 30s. Whenever they came over, they get stuck in the mindset of the time they came over. So it's a different kind of inability to evolve with your people the way they're evolving, let's say, in the homeland. And also this idea that we go to lands that are similar to ours is absolutely impossible to prove, because there's nothing about the western corner of Pennsylvania that is like the hills of Lebanon at all. Ever.
Okay. You guys must have had a bad recruiter, because we were able we were able to recreate Scandinavia in America quite effectively. So you just...
Do you want to say where?
Well, my family has been in all the places. So my family first was in Cape Ann in Massachusetts, and then we went to Duluth, Minnesota, Ashtabula, Ohio, Astoria, Oregon, Portland, and Seattle. So we've hit all the spots. And every summer you can go to a Fin Fest in one of those places, and they still do the same thing where they like carry the wife, relay race where you like run and carry your wife, which I don't think they've done that in actual Scandinavia. Whatever.
Okay.
It's not a marathon.
Okay.
But yeah, so we're trapped in time, but we're able to kind of recreate the landscape, and I think that keeps things going. I think about other places, like I worked a lot with like Hmong refugees who come from kind of a pre-industrial society, and then all of a sudden they're dropped down in the projects, in urban America, and okay. And so the loss of the lifestyle that's associated with being agrarian. I mean, I think there was a moment in time where we all thought black folks, were rural, and then after the Great Migration, we're all supposed to be urban, and to identify as black, we have to have urban references, and we're supposed to say things like, we don't swim, we don't go camping, we don't do these various things, because now we have this urban identity that's been thrust upon us, sometimes we chose to go, and sometimes we didn't.
And then you lose that too, because now the gentrification is pushing everybody out of the places they're supposed to inhabit.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the recolonization.
Just something that you both said, and I think I'm in an excellent position being between them. It's almost as if know that ideas are coming in and then they're mixing. Just the question of home and boundaries, and you'll see how this relates to what's been said. One situation that I've often found myself in, and beginning when I was a child, and that it happens at least once a year, and I don't know if either of you has experienced this. I'm in a place that I would consider home. I teach and live in Western Massachusetts. It's a wonderful community. And so when you're in a place where you feel comfortable, you begin to feel safe. And so crossing a street, crossing a highway, even in a crosswalk where, they have the sign that says pedestrians have right-of-way, more than once it's happened where I've walked across to the other side and a vehicle would come so close as to just about hit me unless I stepped out of the way. And in this case, the driver yelled out his window, "Nigger, go home." And the question then that comes from that is, well, what does he think home is for me? Where is it? Because certainly it's not there. And so I think part of what we're dealing with is truly a segregation of ideas, these frames, these limited confines of people needing to be, say, people who, African Americans who moved north or moved west from the south in the Great Migration, becoming urban, and therefore you have to be this type of person, or therefore you're not really African American. And so part of what I've tried to do in Trace and part of what I do in my work is to answer that question. I am home. And perhaps it's understanding that home has a complicated history, and if you knew more about it, you'd understand why you have no right to say what you did. So.
That's not a complicated person, by the way. Kind of pointing that out.
Yeah. Okay.
You're right. I've forgotten where we were in all of this. Because I have those moments all the time. I have this part in my book where I'm like, well, which is why I hate Boston so much, where I was always told to be going home. And I'm like, believe me, I'm trying.
We're not in Boston now.
But where is it? And what are these claims, and what also are then these cultural practices associated with landscape, which I have this tortured relationship with, and thinking that I think there's also this kind of the mythology of America, kind of remaking yourself, and we're those of us who come here through agency, then thinking that it's progress and it's by your bootstraps and it's up, and that involves a lot of time leaving the landscape, because that's considered, that's country, that's bush, that's whatever, and so then being sold this bill of goods about being urban. And I think that was part of it too for me. I found the landscape of the countryside frightening. I mean, I knew that that's where scary things happened. If you were out late at night on roads and stuff like that, it wasn't particularly safe. So I didn't like the idea of urban, though I don't know when I got that, because as a child I grew up camping, going, riding my horse into the hills, doing all this sort of thing. And then at a certain point I realized that, as a black body, that was a scary thing to do. And so I lost that. That connection was taken away from me.
Well, we have that image, that recurring image of the black man or the black woman walking along the country road in the South, and the whites coming up, and next thing you know, someone's lynched or someone's shot or someone's raped. Yeah. And those experiences persisted. So the fact that a black body wouldn't feel safe in the rural, it just feels like you took your training well, in a way, because those pictures were there over and over and over again.
Those pictures were there over and over again, but they weren't the only pictures. There are so many people, African Americans, who live in the South and who've lived in the South prior to the Civil War, who lived there after the war, who would choose a rural environment because that was where solace was, that was where escape was, that was where medicinal properties could be taken from the plants that you knew so intimately. And so I think part of what is going on is that limiting frame that we're exposed to, and not recognizing that there's a richness beyond that showed the natural world as a haven too. And it also was a haven after the war, the war meaning the Civil War, when so many African Americans moved west to settle lands in Oklahoma, in Kansas, and as far as California, to become autonomous farm-supported communities, and they did. And so understanding that, I think, is part of what might open a different relationship.
And you can reclaim that, and not be told, oh, that's white.
Exactly, and that's it. Reclaim
but how does it become part of the popular picture? That's what, because...
I don't know.
Yeah, right? I mean, that's part of the problem. I mean, there's a silly little story about my grandchildren who are African American, and they came to stay with us, and I took them to the woods. They're from Antioch, and they've only been to parks. And Giselle, who was 7 at the time, said, "Who put all this dirt here?" And I said, "This is the earth. It was here first." And she put her hands on her hips and she said, "No, it isn't." And she was very upset that somebody had left the earth so dirty. And, so it was a process of like training her to know the woods and creeks, and I taught her to climb a tree.
How did you train her?
Every Sunday, we went to the woods. Every Sunday, they caught guppies, they climbed trees, they did all the things.
I had a similar situation when we moved to my grandparents' farm. I think I was 5, and we were taking a walk in the pasture, and I screamed because a horse had walked by and pooped in front of us. And so I marched back in, and I said, I'm not coming out into this landscape until the horses learn how to use the horse bathroom.
Oh. Wow.
So it took a little.
Okay. And it's funny, because my experience in some ways is the opposite. Originally born here in California, and those of you who live here, you know what the quality of light is, the intenseness, the brightness, and what the landscape is. You have the rainy season, and then the gold hits the hills. And so when I was a child, about 5, I had my own self-theory, and the theory was that I was made of golden light in the deep blue sky, just the way the California earth was. That sky and sun colored the land. And that's, if I heard the word colored at that point, that's what I thought it was. But we moved east just when I was 7 years old, just in time for the riots. And at that point, as a 7-year-old, being spat upon by people in an urban environment, I thought the city was dangerous. And not only that, I realized that the land doesn't hate you, people do. And so I sought a relationship with the environment because I knew it would not judge me, it would not spit on me. And everything I've done since then has been in a way to understand human connections to place. So there's so many different stories of relationship that you can make a tapestry that has a million colors, but we're only taught or shown a few, and we need to see more and hear more.
Reminds me of there's a current wave of literature, I guess it's about 4 or 5 years old, that it's about encountering wild spaces being a person of color and how uncomfortable that is. The Hiking While Black and Black Faces, White Spaces by Carol Finney. And I've experienced this with my husband and and I've heard stories. Vernon Keeve tells a story about it. People tell these stories about they're in the woods and people threaten them. Like, what are you doing here? Like, this doesn't belong to you. So your Berkeley upbringing messed you up, by the way. I mean, in a good way. But
I have to add, it's LA too. So.
Okay. But I love that idea that you're made of the earth and the sun, and that, I wish that was our American mythology. No matter what that earth and sun is, whether it's downtown San Francisco, it would be beautiful if we saw ourselves in this large arc of the sky and the ground. It would be amazing to see ourselves as a natural thing. But we fight the natural things very often, and we praise the unnatural things.
Right.
That's
true. That's true. Yeah. I'm thinking of, just to go back to the question of where are you from, I know that, like, when you meet anyone, at least in Nigeria, when they say, where are you from, you can never claim a city. You can't say, I'm from the city. People will be like, no, where are you really from? And they really mean your father's village. Someone's bones are under earth. And you may not have ever been there. And at this point, you may not even speak the language, but that's where you're from. And that becomes really, really clear. And that is really reassuring to have that. Unlike here, I think, where America's built on just this movement, or at least that's the mythology, that wherever you are at that moment is where you're from, or the kind of people you gather around you. There's not that connection to the soil, to the earth. And so then what is lost from that?
Right.
Both individually, but also as communities, as we have these kind of these erasures. I'm just thinking that when I walk around landscapes now and I see, like, a new shop, or I see a new this or that, like, now I know the cost, like, who's been displaced. But originally you just arrive and you're like, wow, this place has lots of great coffee shops. I'm gonna make it as a writer in this town. It's great. And then you find out later, like, who's been pushed out for that.
Right.
And sometimes it never gets resolved. I mean, if we look at Emeryville and Shell Mound and all the stuff that went up there, and there was a lot of flutter about it. You guys remember there was a little bit of flutter about it before the IKEA and all that stuff was put up. And then it died down, and it's if there were never indigenous people here, if their burial grounds were never there, and we just go shopping for bookshelves to assemble. I mean, it's tragic in a way that we could just pick this commodity over the sacred, and it's done constantly, and it's justified and rationalized.
Right.
It will bring jobs. That's the one thing you can
Right.
throw in front of the American
It will bring
people,
jobs.
and they'll bite, right?
So I've often wondered then, does progress require amnesia?
Wow.
Does progress require forgetting? Because I am so tied to the past, but not to the past that is fixed and past and done and has nothing to do with us now, but how the past lives in us today. Let me give you an example, and I'm wondering if it applies to you, would you mind raising your hand? The Homestead Act of 1862. It opened up land to people who would move out west and settle on the land, improve up, that is, to settle it, build a structure, build a fence, put it into productivity. And at this point, about a fifth of the American population are descendants of those who claimed land by the Homestead Act. I'm curious, is anyone here in that room? So, wow. Great. Across the room. So you would think that the Homestead Act would be an opening to everyone who could go out there and settle on land. But did you also know that the Homestead Act, at first, de facto, by law, and then by custom, did not let African American settlers take land, did not let Mexican or Mexican American settlers take land, certainly did not let indigenous people take land, and did not let Asian American people take land. And so people do not know that this easy process of claiming land was only open to a select few. And laws like that have been passed along from the time this nation was settled. You could look at the Alien Exclusion Acts that limited, especially in this state, people of Asian ancestry. And these exclusion acts limited their potential to buy land. And so that gets back to what you can claim as home and where the difficulties are, the silences are, or the disconnects are when we try to look back in our past.
Yeah, Kamau Bell just had, and just recently did a show in Portland, on Black Portland, and, which is kind of a joke of how white it's been, but then he went back and looked at, how the law set it up to be that way, and then the one neighborhood they could be in, of course, now is being gentrified, is filled with mustaches, but, but those things don't just happen. And that's the thing, what's lost when we don't look at that unvoiced history.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's easy to look. It's easy to look if one has the intention to do so. Yeah. Okay.
Should we open it up?
Is it time already?
No, but are there more things you want to say? I kind of want to be in conversation with this group here.
Yeah,
I'm hearing
because
something.
they're nodding. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Don't you want to be in
in.
conversation with us?
You want to talk to us? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, gentlemen. Yeah.
I mourn the loss of physical maps.
Oh, right.
No.
I think I've found members of my tribe.
You mean right here in this room?
Right.
Yes.
How many trips I'll never go on have I planned in my mind and
Right.
just been romanticizing the exotic names. I grew up in Oakland and Berkeley at a time when people were fighting for the park. They were burning draft cards, and Panthers were the proudest thing walking the streets.
Nice.
I live in a rural, northern Monterey County, in a rural area. Got a cow in my backyard. Yeah, big old food chicken. And I've pined to move back to Oakland for 10 or 15 years. When I come up here now, the physical landscape is not the city that I pined. I'll never forget working at, it's now called Oracle Arena in my youth. And had there was a white guy I was going to stand with, and he was telling me to tell him going back to Germany and finding his family's roots from 16 whatever. And he put down his nose at me and said, "What a pity that you can't do the same."
Whoa.
And I've ruminated on that question for about 30 years. And what I came to for myself long ago was I am, and black people generally are not necessarily prisoners of that trail back to that particular village. But by being freed from that, we so easily call and recognize each other as brothers and sisters. I thought that may have had something to do with that. as I wrestle with coming back to Oakland or not, my family has been in Oakland since the 40s. Mom's there. My wife is there. And on this gentrification question, I can't help but think, as two-generation property owners in West Oakland, why not us?
Right.
Why don't we get to benefit? Why is it bad and a negative thing for long-time homeowners to benefit from a rise in price? Or do we have to have that reason to make that progress? Right? The FHA continues to make those exclusionary laws and black folks tomorrow.
Right.
And so, and I'll wrap this up with that culture. Black city-states, ghettos, have been incredible manufacturers of culture, not only for the U.S. but worldwide. As these dynamics cause changes in these neighborhoods, gentrification, so to speak, what happens to culture and the displacement of those peoples, and how responsible should long-term black homeowners be, and how excited should we be for, quote, gentrification?
Wow.
Well, I think it would be helpful, too, if there's incentive, right? Because one of my friends said, these parklets keep popping up. They somehow offend me. Why parklets would offend me is hard to say, but I think it's because they feel like the front porch of gentrification. So, like, she said, and she's from West Oakland, she said, they never built no parklet for me. And I asked myself, why didn't she get the coffee shop? Why didn't she get the parklet? Why didn't she get the car detailing? Why didn't she get the lift ride? Why didn't she get that? And that's just one perspective. The other perspective, did anybody see Shanaka Hodge and Saul Williams on Thursday night? She did this wonderful set of poems telling the stories of people who lived in houses in West Oakland. And this guy lived there, and this guy lived there. They weren't people to just move out so that other people could move in. So she dedicated a poem to many of the residents on her block. And it was such a beautiful way of honoring her neighborhood. And I believe it's in her new book, so I'm going to promote somebody else's book right now. But it's true. There's something about the dispensability of the black population in a neighborhood. All of a sudden, these are Victorian homes, right, instead of, like, cheap apartments. All of a sudden, they're, like $2,000 for a studio, right? When you could have picked up a house like 5 years ago for $100,000 or whatever. So my question is your question. Why? Do you want to go?
Wow, you brought up so many things there. And I like the fact that you're complicating, like, the idea of why can't we sell at a large profit if we want to and leave. I don't know where we're going to go, but if you want to cash out, brother, that's cool.
Oh, no.
And I know I'm prone to nostalgia. I've only been here 9 years, and I'm all like, back in the day. When I came, it was for the right reasons. These people are coming, it's for the wrong reasons. So, like, I know I'm prone to that. That's something. So I haven't even worked that out. But I did want to, I'm just going to put a plug in for an event. Did people see that tomorrow someone is talking about the green book? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Negro's Route 66 and the Negro's Guide to Travel, which I think is just when you kind of brought up the idea of maps, which is something that I'm fascinated with. I just love maps and I love looking at them. And I studied anthropology, and Claude Levi-Strauss says real places don't exist in maps. So I love the limitation of what maps are too. And I actually work with my students to map spaces. It's one of the things I'm really interested in, is how you look at a space and how you really try to capture it. And maps are different ways in, as opposed as I am to boundaries and borders. I think maps are just a really fascinating tool for they're a kind of narrative, they're a kind of storytelling, which is really interesting. Yeah.
And they always fold right on the place where you need to see them.
Always. Yeah. I don't use them to try to get anywhere. No. I try to understand what we're thinking at by looking at the map.
I wanted to go last because my two colleagues, they still live here, and they know this place now. And if I may throw a question, not back at you, sir, but to everyone, if you think of it, haven't African American communities been dispensable everywhere, all along? And so that this is a continuation or another form of what is happening in urban environments seems to be a continuation of a very long pattern. And so then how does one step out of it? I do not have the answer. I really don't. But it's something that I think many communities have faced from the very beginning. And if I can just throw in one example, after the American Revolution, there were some Africans who had been enslaved, but they served in the war, and this is near Plymouth, Massachusetts. And after the war, they were granted their freedom, and they were granted land to form a community. And guess what they called that community? Parting Ways. And it was a beautiful place. But could they keep that land? Until that land became valuable for other things. And it's a pattern that has repeated and repeated and repeated over and over again, while those who had literally the power and the financial means to change went about and doing it. So I wish I had the answer that would, there we go. But I don't. And it makes me sad.
Yeah, there is no answer, right? I'll
Yeah.
just leave you with what I tell to the hipsters fighting generation. Go east, white folks. Go east.
There's somebody back there.
And then up
Oh,
here.
okay.
Well,
I see you.
okay. Yeah, you do it.
Hi. Laura, the line from your prologue that most struck me was that we are living among the relics and the ruins of the past. And there's a connotation there that these ruins, they're not landmarks or monuments that are remembered and celebrated. They're forgotten, abandoned, mistreated perhaps. And some of these ruins are from our own histories and some of them are from other people's histories. My question is, generally, but particularly for people of color, what do these landscapes need from us now?
Recognition, honor, respect, and respect in the sense of the root of the word, meaning to look again and again, and understanding that they do connect to who we are today and to where we might be going. Because so many of them exist without narratives told in popular, well, definitely not in the media, but even in popular history about what they are and why they are. I mean, just a small case in point, South Carolina plantation on the National Register of Historic Places, a plantation that the state has school children go to in real field trips and virtual field trips so that they could see what a real plantation is. And guess what their definition of plantation is? A large estate on which crops are grown by resident workers. That's the definition. And then the tour that gives you, so much about the owners and how they were connected to the American Revolution, and you really think this is a great place. And then you walk to the cemetery, and the cemetery grounds of the family owners, beautifully well tended. Headstones, footstones, marble, brushed, really swept every day. But then as you turn around and start walking back through the woods, then you see fist-size stone here, fist-size stone here, fist-size stone there, fist-size stone there. 130 fist-size stones in poison ivy back into the woods, who represented the people who actually worked the land, 3,000 acres, to make it one of the most productive cotton plantations. And the tour itself gave no word on slavery and no word on the people who worked the land. Right. And so there are pieces around us that we could easily walk by and not even see or recognize. But they're there. They're there if we can look.
Mm-hmm. It worries me because of that trend, especially in Texas, to rewrite the textbooks. I start to worry because, as you may not know this, but Texas controls because of printing and publishing. They control over a third of the textbooks that go to all United States classroom. Texas.
Yeah.
So they
And
have
if they kill one.
redefined slaves. They have redefined slaves as guest workers. They have redefined the Mexicans. I mean, they have totally washed out these histories. Is there going to be a point where we have trained our generations to not even know this history?
Yes.
I mean, I want to ask all of you, how much did you learn about Native Americans when you were in school? Where did you learn about the internment camps? I learned mine from a PBS special. I didn't learn it in school. Yeah.
Here?
Here at Berkeley, Northern California.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. Of course not. Joyce, we never heard that, right?
Yeah.
So
To learn more teaching the University of North Dakota.
see that? See that? Yeah, where I went to get my doctorate at University of Nebraska, you could do your dissertation in Winnebago, which I always appreciate about, the Midwest. I think it's very conscientious. But I think a lot of us don't have any of this knowledge.
Right.
And then I worry because of this textbook thing, that the next generation and the generation after that, nobody's going to say, where's the word slave? Because it's going to be gone.
Right.
Do we have to
Be a guest
redo
worker.
roots every 20 years? I mean,
Technology is changing that because more schools are able not to rely on a printed book. When schools relied solely on printed textbooks, Texas was in control. But once the publishers can deal with electronic formats and students, that there's a positive push away from Texas.
But it also depends on what those publishers are publishing, too.
You've got someone up there? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Norma Chavez, and I'm an immigrant from Michoacan, Mexico. I came to this country, to California, when I was 5 years old, and I'm actually here from San Diego, so it wasn't an accident, but I didn't know that there was this book festival going on. And when I saw and then when I saw this conversation, I just was so fascinated by it because one, I'm Chicana, I'm Mexican, I'm Native, I'm all that, and I was an Aztec dancer for many, many years, so I'm totally in touch with my native side, and land is something that's very powerful, and just being connected to the earth. My husband's African American, so my children are biracial. They're Blaxican, as we say in our house. But actually, it was perfect because Elmas brought it up. But what I'm an organizer. I've been an organizer for 20 plus years, working in affordable housing and all sorts of issues, and working directly with low income people of color in San Diego. And something that I was thinking about as we had this conversation was about, the folks in our communities that are not finishing high school, that are not getting the right education in the public school system. I mean, I know for me, it was college activists that introduced me to Mecha and Lorna D. Cervantes and Rudy Acuña and all these folks that I could relate to. And that began to really, for me, help me deal with my, who am I? ¿De dónde soy? Am I from here, from there? All these issues of identity. And I just want to share this story of two different scenarios, working in a Barrio Logan, which is kind of like the mission of San Francisco, a poor Mexican neighborhood, and working in affordable housing. And I remember working with youth. I was organizing youth and residents, and many of them had never even been to the beach. And they're literally a mile from the beach. So how do we, because families that are living in poverty in the urban communities sometimes don't even have the time to just even go to the beach or to, Then I'm working in a historically black community in San Diego and working with a couple young African-American young men. They've never been hiking in San Diego. People come from all over the world to visit San Diego and to go hiking and to go camping and to do all these things. And then if you're poor, you don't even leave your neighborhood because you're in fear of police. So it just was kind of reminding me just the importance of the work that you all do. How do we get more young people in our schools to hear the stories of your own experience? And there's just so much work that we need to do, not just in the public school system, but in poor neighborhoods right now, so that young people actually get access to just the conversation that they never even get a chance to have.
You also have to be able to see yourself at the beach. I think that some of the kids who live in those entrenched neighborhoods don't even see themselves at the beach. They don't see the beach as someplace that they can belong in. I think that's part of it too.
And there are examples. Do you know of Outdoor Afro?
Yeah, I was thinking of that. Yeah.
Okay. Rue, are you there? I didn't see you in the light.
There she is.
That's funny.
Okay.
I was thinking about
Rue
that
Map has established this amazing network called Outdoor Afro. And is it outdoorafro.com? Okay. And Rue can say more about it, but there are many different ways to get kids to see that this is a place for them and that there are many others around, not just in California, but across the country who are there too. And Rue, thank you.
Thank you, Rue.
Yes, yes.
Hi, I'm Stacy Johnson. I'm in my last year of an MFA at Mills College. And my question is about creating memory. In an environment where forgetting and not remembering is profitable, it's comfortable, we're used to it. When you try to remember or bring up remembering, you're often told things like, that was a long time ago. Get over that. We don't do that anymore. Oh, that was a farm, not a plantation. So how do we create memory? You know, slaves were farmers, is what students are being taught in elementary school now.
Right.
So in an environment where it is profitable and in alignment with capitalism to forget, how do we create memory?
That is such a great question.
Well, I'm letting you answer it since I'm directing her thesis.
That is hilarious. I've just officially given you some extra credit for your thesis there.
Are you working on it with her too?
No. I'm, Elmaz can't do it, but I'm giving her extra credit points. When you were talking about that, the word exhume or exhumation was going through my head. The whole idea of, which is to dig up someone, but is also to bring back to light, bring back to memory. And that's kind of what we do when we're telling stories, whether we're writing them or just telling things to anybody who wanders by. I think that, talking about that, I'm very strategic. I grew up with, my father refusing to talk about the genocide that had happened against the Igbo people in Nigeria in the Civil War. And so, those people died, we don't just really talk about it. And I can really see how Nigeria is in a state of crisis, much like America, when people don't talk about things because it's not been resolved. And when kind of one of the best moments when I was with the PBS film crew and we were walking around my father's village where people stare at me and say, like, who's the white girl? And
really?
Yeah, and we were filming, which really stressed people out because they had just gotten out of a dictatorship, and so you don't trust cameras. And so this kind of group of men came up to me and they said, what are you doing filming our village? And then somebody said, oh, wait, I think that's so-and-so's daughter. And they were like, oh, are you so-and-so's daughter? Are you, doctor's daughter? And I said, yes. And I said, I'm doing a film about my experience here. And they said, oh, you've heard Americans don't know where they came from. And it's causing a lot of problems. So you're gonna record how we know who we are, and you're gonna take it back and help them, right? And I said, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. And then they're like, okay, carry on. So then the entire village performed for me, and I thought it was really interesting that this off the grid, tiny village, not very many educated people knew that the entire country of America was suffering because we don't listen to our history. And so it was just, here's another opportunity to talk about it with them, talk about it with other people, and just always be, the corrective, always be that annoying person at the dinner table saying like, in my day, but, to really be, and then I do a lot of kind of tricking people. Well, so-and-so told me this happened. And and my late father would be like, well, we don't really talk about it, but he got it wrong. And then will tell me another version. So I'm always playing people off against each other or doing research so that I can jog memory, because that's the first thing they say, oh, we don't think about that, we don't talk about it. And it's a little different from, people saying, saying those weren't slaves. But I'm talking about people who are traumatized and don't want to talk about it. But then once they start to remember, and you're there, and you're writing it down, and you're acting as though this is the stuff of literature, this is the stuff of our national history, you get to be part of the narrative, then they start to get power and speak through the pain and remember things together. And collectively kind of reclaim this history that they've been taught to, that was traumatic, and then they see the healing involved in it. So that's kind of my role, to be the agitator. Yeah.
We're getting our signal from.
Oh, how much time? 3
minutes.
Okay. Really, okay. Could I say something really briefly to that question about memory? You know that the root of the word for remember means to piece together again, to piece the body back together again. And so it's putting the fragments, or first looking for the fragments and putting them back together again. And the other thing I just want to mention really quickly is that many people think of history as being, just what happened. But history really is the stories that are told about what happened.
Right.
And so thinking about
the victors.
The victors. And so whose stories are being told and what stories are missing. And it's just really being responsible to what you don't know and looking for it, and responsible to the unvoiced past. It is there waiting. It may be hard to find, but the fragments are there. And if we know more of it, then we have a better chance of remembering a larger sense of who we are in this land. It's a great question, and I'd love to talk with you more about it. Okay, sorry.
I just wanted to, we can end on a positive note. Recently went to hear Brian Stevenson, Just Mercies, and he has initiated an art project across the South where the lynchings sites are going to be commemorated as such. So that's a reclaiming of a place that was once just land with a tree. Nice. It's now going to have a very powerful marker.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
He's fantastic. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Is that it? Wait. There's going to be a signing over there, though I'm sure you're going to rush the table, and so we won't even be able to get there because we'll be like basking in all the love. But thank you so much.